If we cast our memories back and look over a life story, it wouldn't be too difficult to notice the presence of a constant sense of seeking, primarily to find satisfaction. Satisfaction is really another way of saying wholeness, and another way of saying wholeness might be seeking to find happiness, contentment, or enoughness, might be a good word to use here. An endless search for enough of certain things and the restriction of other things in our lives, so that enough of what is satisfies. And we would soon see that there are periods, pockets, and enduring pages on which enough of certain things was found. And soon they seem to pass. Perhaps relationships were in the right place, finances were in the right place, whether financially we mean there seemed to be enough money, or there seemed to be enough financial simplicity. Even, one doesn't need, most people know one doesn't need endless resources of financial security in order to be happy. In fact, many of us have found that significant financial resources can often lead to increased levels of anxiety, experiences of anxiety, at the thought of those levels of financial security being removed. In essence, we find happiness in other places other than simple material or financial security. But generally, the human story is one of this seeking of contentment or happiness or peace or enough of what is. Most of us, our lens for life is that of our subjective experience of a world of disparate objects and preferences, things we like, things we don't like, experiences we would rather seek, and other experiences once had we would avoid, or experiences observed of other people as going through difficulties, struggle and suffering that we would rather never know ourselves. But all of us would surely acknowledge that over a lifetime, and for some of us in even quite a short lifetime, we all know different experiences of, in the world we inhabit, in the narrative of my story, happiness, sadness, and a linearity that stretches experiences of ecstasy and community and togetherness and wholeness, and at the other end of the continuum, suffering, poverty of all kinds, loneliness, pain, torment, and even living hell. We stretch between heaven and hell as experiences that we know. We don't need ideas of other geographical locations of either perfection or abject misery. The heaven is up here and hell is down there. Experiences of religious and philosophical thought and inquiry in the human's search for meaning. But those historic ideas, those mythical ideas of heaven and hell, do offer us a narrative, places to apply beliefs, or, for what I'm trying to articulate here, a psychological understanding of the continuum of the human experience and experiment between these polarities of heaven and hell, or happiness and sadness, or tragedy and mystery and ecstasy. Most of us are somewhere around the middle of that linearity, of course. Personally, yes, certainly, my understanding of what I might call hell, it's just an umbrella term, is a period of hopelessness, as has been said. Without hope, there is just a desire for hope, and that is perhaps the loneliest of experiences I've known. Isolation, desperation, marginalization. From that to moments of unitive consciousness, of transcendence, of psychedelic experiences, of intimate experiences, of communal experiences, of geographical locations, places, and the knowing of experiences through beautiful natural vistas, sunny days, rainy days, regardless. Just moments of awe and wonder and ecstasy at the simple, rarefied beauty of being and knowing that moment that I'm referring to here, I guess. And we've all known, to a greater or lesser degree, subjective idea of things that we cherish, memories we cherish, and memories we would rather not have or have had. And so it is. And in that searching, on reflection, with hindsight, these 54 years have been a constant, almost constant search for that component, that seeming missing thing. And in every search, and in every outcome of a search, be it academic, psychedelic, psychological, sociological, environmental, familial, relational, intimate, or isolate, and every one of those inquiries, whether I withdrew from loved ones, whether I abandoned myself into loving communities of various types, each one offered a glimmer of that which was sought as an idea, the seed of thought that was the spark of the next undertaking to try and bring about happiness by works and by the movement and modulation of people, places and things outside of me, in order to bring about a feeling of belonging and wholeness and completion inside of me. This is how we live, is it not? In that, coupling together of despair, loneliness, withdrawal from community, be that intimate relationships, familial relationships, peer group relationships, the absolute loneliest experience I've known has been around the turn of the millennium, or just after the turn of the millennium, living in capital city and identifying with the most disparate group of outcasts, social outcasts at the time, and finding the most strange relationships in those outcasts. The sex workers, the addicts, the alcoholics, the destitute, the prostitute, and so on, and integrating myself in that most fractious community where we would believe ourselves to be protected by those that would affirm that they had our back in the same way that I had their back. But of course, those most likely to stab us in the back or each other in the back were those very ones affirming they were here to protect us and look out for each other. So in this most fractious family with which we all seem to belong at what we perceive to be the bottom run of society, though we still stood in the gutter looking down at those we perceived to be lower than ourselves in order to raise ourselves up above our lowly status. We took what we could from each other and we gave what we could to each other. And both were of very marginal levels, the giving and the taking. Born out of the inability to receive, really. That's how we ended up so marginalised. Yet out of that, and without wanting to belittle the desperation and the heartbreak of living in such a rabid community of erstwhile ghosts, rose a gift. Everything be a gift and every experience be a teacher if we are graced enough to be able to extract the lesson of the teaching of each experience. And as we find in an upside-down economy, as we find in an economy of falling upwards, that the very powerlessness, the very emptiness, the very brokenness is a much more enduring transfiguration, a much more transformative function to rise out of emptiness, that, the brokenness and that emptiness, the way of the cross, the Christian mystics might call it, where we see this symbol, this imagery, this iconography of, in this instance, a mythical story of a character who is the very embodiment of love in the human walk, nailed to a symbol that personifies, that symbolizes the very brokenness of love, the very emptiness and absence of love. Great love nailed to great suffering is a violently beautiful image for the human walk. This image that this God, this absolute, this great reality, this oneness is the embodiment of great love and great suffering, unified, is the yin and yang of all endeavour in this form as we currently understand it, at least. So to have come to that very understanding I've just described out of the previous set of circumstances previously described is somehow the greatest and not taken for granted graceful gifting. Now let's acknowledge, of course, that one's only able to have that perspective because one is no longer living in such terrible circumstances. One is no longer lonely or heartbroken or desperate. But having known and surrendered to, having been enslaved to desperation, loneliness, isolation and deprivation, those experiences, those concepts are embodied in the sense of freedom one then encounters. As much as we have fallen from grace, does it seem that we are able to rise from that same grace with the measure meted out through our experience and our lowly apparent choices? So these curses become gifts. We do indeed fall upwards. And those highs, one might say, let's use that word, those gracious giftings of moments of unified consciousness, moments of awe and wonder, struck by awe, those moments of peak experience, to be in the experience of a moment, of a place, of a state, of a taste, of a sensory experience with which one's usual thinking mind, one's monkey mind, is unable to dominate the experience. So the experience is happening to you, and the sense of self that the monkey mind is cathected to, is addicted to, is unable to take itself to be the doer, the giver of this transcendent experience. Experience overtakes mind, and we are not doing the experience is happening to us. This is the very nature of experience. The experience is not done, is not brought about by an individuated subjective effort to attain and to accomplish, to control and to have and to be the champion, the gods with a small g that the self would say it is, which is its constant movement, is to bring about a sense of success. And anything in need of success, anything with a drive towards success, has to know, has to be out, has to manifest out of, has to be born from the absence of success. Everything brings its opposite. So only from the absence of, if not failure, of earlier what I mentioned, enoughness. Let me use a rather clunky term here, of not being enough, of not enoughness, or of the absence or of a lack. Only from a sense of lack does the idea emerge that one need overcome this sense of lack or this absence that isn't seemingly apparent. This rises as the next thought, of course, and as the thought arises, and it's my thought, the next thought is, how can I overcome this sense in the body and in the emotional spectrum that something is somehow missing or something is absent from my current experience? Because my thought tells me this is so. So I follow that thought, and a plan is created in the next thought and the thought after of how to bring about that thing that seems to be lacking. And of course, one is relying on that which the problem arose out of in order to overcome the problem. As most of us know, that Einstein said, we cannot solve a problem with the same consciousness that created it, or we cannot solve a problem with the same mind that created it, or the mind that creates a problem is insufficient in order to bring about the solving of that problem. Even Einstein's theory of relativity, we know to have come out of a prayerful place, of a place of emptiness, of a place of no thought, or a place of meditation, we might use that clunky term. But in the absence of the sense of self that Albert Einstein took himself to perhaps be, did he arrive back in that sense of beingness from somewhere other than that sense of being Albert Einstein, with the very theory of relativity and all that offered, pro and con, to the human experiment as we move through apparent time and space. So to stand by the sea and stand overwhelmed by the experience of a prosaic wave, followed by the next wave and the next wave, to encounter the simple smell of a dog, the sight of horses galloping, cliffs, mountains, valleys, trees. The natural world is a wonderful place of embodied beingness. As we recognize and arrive at an experience of that which we are essentially made of knowingness, of beingness, of isness, the very isness of nature is the very isness of the human experience. The body is that in which the mind arises as an idea, and the mind arises as an idea in consciousness. And so it is in the very expression of nature that we recognize our true nature as that as endemic to the experience of the natural habitat that we find ourselves in, whether this is in the company of an ant, or for myself, whether it's me trying to persuade flies that enter into my house to politely leave via an open window that I've opened for them, and sometimes engage in protracted discussion on how the benefits for them in being outside far outweigh the benefits of flying around my home trying to access the bin or the toilet facilities, or maybe hover over my plate of food as I try and eat it. You'd be surprised at how successful such a discussion often is. As I encounter in the presence of what is another apparent sentient experience, a simple much-loathed fly, and I recognize the experience of myself coming back towards me, of an appearance of what is, and a movement in that through the simple fly, and in recognizing the divinity of that experience and the very similarity, not just the similarity, but the lack of division between myself and the apparent other, and the kindness one is able to offer into that momentary seeming experience, using simple language to try and persuade a fly to leave. And then sometimes, of course, perhaps the fly is just visiting, and it's quite welcome to visit. It's nice to have visitors, isn't it? So you can hear here, after a life of seeking and a passing recognition of the absence of seeking, or the limits of decades of seeking and sometimes violent and aggressive attempts to bring about the experience of peace and happiness and wholeness, enoughness. And the failure of those plans to finally bring about an enduring sense of peace, out of that and out of the appropriate pointings and the appropriate, at first, seeking into other forms of the human being's search for meaning and teachings around that, of which there are endless amounts, an experience that moved beyond experience itself, happened to no person, and what happened was that nothing happened to no person, which here words struggle to convey as they should, because words reach a limit, but they're the best that we have to express into this expression. That from that recognition, after 40 years, over 50, of looking outwardly and looking inwardly, of navigating the outer world or outer space and trying to understand and inquire into apparent inner space, did the recognition come of the absolute spaciousness, luminous, undivided beingness, to which both inner and outer are mere concepts, and the recognition of there being no person within that lacked anything. In fact, the apparent person within that seemed to lack something that it felt it needed to find by works and activities, once seen through, both the apparent person and all seeking evaporated, and what was left was radically ordinary, unending, simple, everyday profundity. A word for this is this, just as it is, unencumbered love.